Chapter 16, A 4-Day Planet, by H. Beam Piper. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 4-Day Planet, Chapter 16, Civil War Postponed. The moaner went on for 30 seconds, like a banshee mourning its nearest and dearest. It was everywhere, main city level and the 4 levels below. What we have in Port Sandor is a volunteer fire organization, or disorganization rather, of 6 independent companies, each of which cherishes enmity for all the rest. It's the best we can do, though. If we depended on the city government, we'd have no fire protection at all. They do have a central alarm system, though, and the Times is connected with that. Then the moaner stopped, and there were 4 deep whistle blasts for 4th Ward, and 4 more shrill ones for bottom level. There was an instant silence, and then a bedlam of shouts from the hunter boat captains. That was where the tallow wax that was being held out from the cooperative was stored. "Shut up!" Dad roared, the loudest I'd ever heard him speak. "Shut up and listen!" "4th Ward, bottom level," a voice from the fire alarm speaker said. "This is a tallow wax fire. It is not the co-op wax. It is wax stored in an otherwise disused area. It is dangerously close to stored 50mm cannon ammunition, and it is directly under the pulpwood lumber plant on the 3rd level down, and if the fire spreads up to that, it will endanger some of the growing vats at the carniculture plant on the 2nd level down. I repeat, this is a tallow wax fire. Do not use water or chemical extinguishers." About half the vigilantes, businessmen who belonged to one or another of the volunteer companies, had bugged out for their fire stations already. The Buddhist priest and a couple of doctors were also leaving. The rest, mostly huntership men, were standing around looking at one another. Oscar Fujisawa gave a sour laugh. "That diversion idea of mine was all right," he said. "The only trouble was that Steve Ravik thought of it first." "You think he started the fire?" Dad began, and then gave a sourer laugh than Oscar's. "Am I dumb enough to ask that?" I had started assembling equipment as soon as the feint on the municipal building and the attack on Hunter's Hall had gotten into the discussion stage. I would use a jeep that had a heavy-duty audio-visual recording and transmitting outfit on it, and for situations where I'd have to leave the jeep and go on foot, I had a lighter outfit like the one Oscar had brought with him in the Pequod's boat. Then I had my radio for two-way conversation with the office. And, because this wasn't likely to be the sort of war in which the rights of non-combatants like war correspondents would be taken very seriously, I had gotten out my Sturberg 7.7mm. Dad saw me buckling it on and seemed rather distressed. "Better leave that, Walt," he said. "You don't want to get into any shooting." Logical, I thought. If you aren't prepared for something, it just won't happen. There's an awful lot of that sort of thinking going on. As I remember my old Terran history, it was even indulged in by governments, at one time. None of them exists now. "You know what all crawls into the bottom level," I reminded him. "If you don't, ask Mr. Morrell here. One sent him to the hospital." Dad nodded. I had a point there. The abandoned sections of bottom level are full of tread snails and other assorted little nasties, and the heat of the fire would stir them all up and start them moving around. Even aside from the possibility that, having started the fire, Steve Ravik's gang would try to take steps to keep it from being put out too soon, a gun was going to be a comforting companion down there. "Well, stay out of any fighting. Your job's to get the news, not play hero in gunfights. I'm no hero. That's why I'm 60 years old. I never knew many heroes that got that old." It was my turn to nod. On that, Dad had a point. I said something about getting the news, not making it, and checked the chamber and magazine of the Sturberg, and then slung my radio and picked up the audio-visual outfit. Tom and Joe Kyvelson had left already to round up the scattered Javelin crew for firefighting. The attack on the municipal building and on Hunter's Hall had been postponed, but it wasn't going to be abandoned. Oscar and Professor Hartzenbosch and Dad and a couple of others were planning some sort of an observation force of a few men for each place, until the fire had been gotten out or under control. Glenn Morrell decided he'd go out with me, at least as far as the fire, so we went down to the vehicle port and got the Jeep out. Main city-level Broadway was almost deserted. Everybody had gone down below where the excitement was. We started down the nearest vehicle shaft and immediately got into a jam, above a lot of stuff that was going into the shaft from first level down, mostly manipulators and that sort of thing. There were no police around Natch, and a lot of volunteers were trying to direct traffic and getting in each other's way. I got some views with the Jeep camera, just to remind any of the public who needed reminding what our city administration wasn't doing in an emergency. A couple of pieces of apparatus, a chemical tank, and a pumper marked Salamander Volunteer Fire Company No. 3 came along, veered out of the jam, and continued uptown. "If they know another way down, maybe we better follow them," Morrell suggested. "They're not going down. They're going to the lumber plant, in case the fire spreads upward," I said. "They wouldn't be taking that sort of equipment to a wax fire." "Why not?" I looked at him. "I thought you were in the wax business," I said. "I am, but I'm no chemist. I don't know anything about how wax burns. All I know is what it's used for, roughly, and who's in the market for it." "Well, you know about those jumbo molecules, don't you?" I asked. "They have everything but the kitchen sink in them, including enough oxygen to sustain combustion even underwater or in a vacuum. Not enough oxygen to make wax explode, like powder, but enough to keep it burning. Chemical extinguishers are all smothering agents, and you just can't smother a wax fire. And water's worse than useless." He wanted to know why. "Burning wax is a liquid. The melting point is around 250 degrees centigrade. Wax ignites at 750. It has no boiling point, unless that's the burning point. Throw water on a wax fire and you get a steam explosion, just as you would if you threw it on molten metal, and that throws the fire around and spreads it." "If it melts that far below the ignition point, wouldn't it run away before it caught fire?" "Normally it would. That's why I'm sure this fire was a touch-off. I think somebody planted a thermoconcentrate bomb. A thermoconcentrate flame is around 850 centigrade. The wax would start melting and burning almost instantaneously. In any case, the fire will be at the bottom of the stacks. If it started there, melted wax would run down from above and keep the fire going, and if it started at the top, burning wax would run down and ignite what's below." "Well, how in blazes do you put a wax fire out?" he wanted to know. "You don't. You just pull away all the wax that hasn't caught fire yet, and then try to scatter the fire and let it burn itself out. Here's our chance." All this conversation we had been screaming into each other's ears, in the midst of a pandemonium of yelling, cursing, siren howling, and bell clanging. Just then I saw a hole in the vertical traffic jam and edged the Jeep into it, at the same time remembering that the Jeep carried, and I was entitled to use, a fire siren. I added its house to the general uproar and dropped down one level. Here a string of big manipulators were trying to get in from below, sprouting claw hooks and grapples and pusher arms in all directions. I made my siren imitate a tail-tramped tomcat a couple of times and got in among them. Bottom-level Broadway was a frightful mess, and I realized that we had come down right between two units of the city power plant, big mass-energy converters. The street was narrower than above and ran for 1,000 yards between the ceiling-high walls, and everything was bottlenecked together. I took the Jeep up till we were almost scraping the ceiling, and Morrell, who had seen how the audio-visual was used, took over with it while I concentrated on inching forward. The noise was even worse down here than it had been above. We didn't attempt to talk. Finally, by impudence and plain foolhardiness, I got the jeep forward a few hundred yards, and found myself looking down on a big derrick with a 50-foot steel boom tipped with a 4-clawed grapple, shielded in front with sheet steel like a gun shield. It was painted with the emblem of the Hunters' Cooperative, but the 3 men on it looked like shipyard workers. I didn't get that at all. The thing had been built to handle burning wax, and was one of the 3 kept on the second level down under Hunter's Hall. I wondered if Bish Ware had found a way for a gang to get in at the bottom of Hunter's Hall. I simply couldn't see Steve Ravik releasing equipment to fight the fire his goons had started for him in the first place. I let down a few feet, gave a polite little scream with my siren, and then yelled down to the men on it. "Where'd that thing come from?" "Hunter's Hall. Steve Ravik sent it. The other 2 are up at the fire already, and if this mess ahead doesn't get straightened out—" From there on, his remarks were not suitable for publication in a family journal like the Times. I looked up ahead, rising to the ceiling again, and saw what was the matter. It was one of the dredgers from the waterfront, really a submarine scoop shovel, that they used to keep the pools and the inner channel from sanding up. I wasn't surprised it was jammed. I couldn't see how they'd gotten this far uptown with it. I got a few shots of that, and then unhooked the handphone of my radio. Julio Kubanoff answered. "You getting everything I'm sending in?" I asked. "Yes. What's that 2M dash thing up ahead? One of the harbor dredgers?" "That's right. Hey, look at this once." I turned the audio-visual down on the claw derrick. "The men on it look like Rodriguez and O'Gurlian's people, but they say Steve Ravik sent it. What do you know about it?" "Hey, Ralph, what's this Waltz picked up about Ravik sending equipment to fight the fire?" he yelled. Dad came over and nodded. "It wasn't Ravik. It was Mort Hallstock. He commandeered the co-op equipment and set it up," he said. "He called me and wanted to know whom to send for it that Ravik's gang wouldn't start shooting at right away. Casimir O'Gurlian sent some of his men." Up front, something seemed to have given away. The dredger went lurching forward, and everything moved off after it. "I get it," I said. "Hallstock's getting ready to dump Ravik out the airlock. He sees now that Ravik's a dead turkey. He doesn't want to go into the oven along with him." "Walt, can't you ever give anybody credit with trying to do something decent once in a while?" Dad asked. "Sure I can. Decent people. There are a lot of them around, but Mort Hallstock isn't one of them. There was an old Terran politician named Al Smith once. He had a little saying he used in that kind of case. Let's look at the record." "Well, Mort's record isn't very impressive, I'll give you that," Dad admitted. "I understand Mort's up at the fire now. Don't spit in his eye if you run into him." "I won't," I promised. "I'm kind of particular where I spit." Things must be looking pretty rough around the municipal building, I thought. Maybe Mort's afraid the people will start running Fenris again after this. He might even be afraid there'd be an election. By this time, I'd gotten the jeep around the dredger. We'd come to the end of the nuclear power plant buildings and cut off into the open country. That is to say, nothing but pillar buildings 200 yards apart and piles of bagged mineral nutrients for the hydroponic farms. We could see a blaze of electric lights ahead where the fire must be, and after a while we began to run into lorries and lifter skids hauling ammunition away from the area. Then I could see a big mushroom of greasy black smoke spreading out close to the ceiling. The electric lights were brighter ahead, and there was a confused roar of voices of sirens and machines. And there was a stink. There are a lot of stinks around Port Sandor, though the ventilation system carries most of them off before they can spread out of their own areas. The plant that reproduces sewage to get organic nutrients for the hydroponic farms, and the plant that digests hydroponic vegetation to make nutrients for the carniculture vats. The carniculture vats themselves aren't any flower gardens. and the pulp plant where our synthetic lumber is made. But the worst stink there is on Fenris is a tallow wax fire. Fortunately, they don't happen often. End of chapter 16.